So it's the end of the year, we are all wrapping up our reading for 2022, and I thought it was high time to let you know the most disappointing books that I read in 2022. Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. I usually don't really make many negative videos about books that I don't like. I feel like I don't really feel the need to waste the energy on telling you about books I didn't like, but every now and then I think it's nice to talk about and just let you know more about my reading tastes. And maybe if you have similar reading tastes, you may not want to pick up these books. But once again, everyone's reading taste is their own. There's probably many people out there who deeply love the books on this list, and more power to them. I do also want to preface this video by saying that these are by no means the worst books that I've ever read or read this year, but I do think that they are the most disappointing to me personally because I had high hopes for them. So all of these books I went into thinking that I was going to either love them or enjoy them in some way, which is I think how everyone goes into a book, but all of these in some way let me down, and so that's why they're on this list. I am not trying to slander these books or their authors or say that these books are inherently awful. I just personally was disappointed by them. So with all those disclaimers said, let's get into the first book, which is Portrait of a Thief. So I don't have a physical copy of this one. I think I started reading it on my e-reader, and this is actually an example of one that I DNF'd. I think this is the only book on this list that I've DNF'd. And the reason I DNF'd this one was because it just did not live up to any of the marketing that it had. And I feel like it just didn't live up to the concept that it was supposed to execute. Basically, this is a book with an all Asian cast and features a heist element with these characters from different walks of life coming together to pull off like multiple art heists. And it's a multi-POV book, and each of the characters is like different in some way. And I think on paper from the description, this book seems like it's going to be absolutely fantastic. But in reality, while reading it, I felt like it lacked a lot of the things that you love in a heist. Like the moments when they're pulling off the heist and then you're finding out, oh, they had like this plan ready and that plan ready, and like there's these things that go wrong and all of that. I feel like it lacked those elements. A lot of what this book consisted of was the characters reflecting on the things that had already happened, and so you were told about things that are happened, but you don't really get to see them happen. And I feel like a lot of it was just more vibes than plot. Well, I do think each of the characters was quite fascinating. I just didn't see the plot element of the book coming together in a well-rounded way that made the book itself interesting. I think this is a book that just had a lot of potential, but ultimately let me down. Alrighty, the next book on this list is one that I'm so sad is on this list, and that is This Woven Kingdom by Tara Mafi. For those of you who have been following my channel over the past year, you know that I'm not really into YA anymore. I do feel like I'm growing out of the category, and I'm not enjoying the ones that I pick up as much. This is not a diss on YA books. I still love them. I still have a lot of them as my favorites and ones that I hold very dearly to my heart, but I think these days I don't intentionally go pick up YA books because I just want books that deal with some more like adult themes or are more relatable for me as someone who's 25. But irregardless of that, I went into this book as someone who is a huge fan of Tara Mafi. I absolutely love her contemporaries, A Very Large Expanse Sea, and also An Emotion of Great Delight. But honestly, I've never actually read her dystopian series, which is the Shadowmere series. So I think had I read that, maybe I would have been a little bit more prepared for this. But I went into this thinking it was going to be this really epic, awesome, high fantasy. And instead what I got was sort of a lower stakes fantasy than I wanted, and one that was a lot less epic than I wanted. Most of this book was sort of focused on the romantic relationship that goes on in the book, but personally that relationship didn't really hit home for me because it was just very like insta-lovey in my opinion. I felt like nothing had really happened to make them fall in love, and so I was sort of confused by that. And I also just felt like the plot went all over the place and I wasn't very invested in the main character, partly because we get very little information about her up front, which makes it hard to sort of empathize with her. Now, this is personally how I perceived the story and how I read it. That's how it hit for me. I feel like for other people, it may have hit differently. I feel like had I read this maybe 5 years ago or when I was in high school, I probably would have loved it. I do see aspects of it that I'm like, oh yeah, had I been younger, I probably would have enjoyed this a lot more. But I think overall, it just didn't live up to the expectations that I had for it and, you know, what I envisioned it hopefully being. And so I think part of my disappointment with this book is just mainly on me for thinking it was going to be something that it was not. With all that said, someone please go write me a Persian-inspired adult high fantasy epic book with political intrigue and multiple characters and a really slow burn romance and all of those things. Like, that's what I wanted, and that's what I did not get, and that's not Tara Mafi's fault. That is my fault for thinking that this is what that would be. Okay, next up I have a couple books that I have not been quiet about saying that I don't like, and they are Sally Rooney books. So specifically these two, I actually really liked her book Conversations with Friends. For some reason that one really hit me. I was like, yes, love this. Love the ruminations on the character's mental health and like just how chaotic she was. But these two books, honestly, did not love them. I feel like they were hyped really high, especially normal people, and it just fell flat for me. This one was Sally Rooney's most recent book, Beautiful World, Where Are You? And I just found the characters really insufferable, including these ones as well. But overall, I just feel like these two books, the story and the characters, I did not love. Whereas Conversations with Friends, I really loved the story and the characters, and I found them really interesting and compelling. But these ones, not so much. But the common denominator for all of these is Sally Rooney, and she has a really beautiful way of writing, and I do think that she's a wonderful writer, but I think story-wise and like the topics that she decides to discuss are just not really my thing. I think Conversations with Friends was like the unique one in the sense that it had some slightly different topics to it, and a main character who was bisexual, and also just like going through this like tough romantic decision, I think. Whereas both of these books, I feel like I wasn't really invested in the characters, and I didn't really care for what was going on in the books. I know a lot of people love Normal People, and I wish I had loved it, but I did not. And that really did surprise me, because I had actually read Conversations with Friends first, thinking that it was the one that I wasn't gonna like because it has the whole affair plot. But then that one ended up being the one that I liked, and then it was just downhill from there because these ones just seemed awful in comparison. I can't really put my finger on it, but if you go watch my whole video where I test out Sally Rooney books, you'll get an in-depth description of why I particularly did not like these two books and why I really loved Conversations with Friends. I think there are two types of people. There's the people who love Conversations with Friends, and then there's the people who love these two books. And you're one or the other. I feel like you can't really be both. Alrighty, next up I have a book that I know a lot of people love and a lot of people also hate, so I don't feel super controversial about talking about this one, so that is Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. While I don't think this is a terrible book, and I do think I would still recommend it to people, I personally was slightly disappointed by this one because I thought it was going to be something that it wasn't really, but I still think it's a good book. I just was like slightly disappointed by the potential that it had to be something different, but I do think it's still cool the way it is. So I feel like out of all the books on this list, this is the one that I'm like least disappointed by, but basically this one has like a bit of a dark academia aspect. It involves a character who goes off to this like secret academy for like multiple years and has zero contact with the rest of the world. And there's also this strange aspect of secretive, mysterious things going on at the school. And while I personally thought that it was going to be more of like a mystery thriller in the sense that like the character was going to go try and figure out what this is, it was very much less of that. While she does try to do that, it's less of a big part of the book, and the story sort of meanders through her 3 years, I think, at the school, and there's different characters that come in and out, and I feel like none of them were super memorable for me. And the main character herself was sort of this passive person for most of the book, which I think adds to this feeling of like all vibes, no plot, because she's not really doing anything. And personally, I'm a person who really likes some plot in their books, so I feel like I'm just not the target audience for this book, and that's completely fine. But overall, while I think it's like an interesting book and has some interesting ruminations and some great lines to it and just some weirdness to it that I think is just fun, I personally didn't love it that much. I think there is a version of this book out there somewhere, or maybe someone's gonna write it one day, that uses this concept of someone going off to this like mysterious place for like 3 years without contact and makes it into this like plot-driven, mysterious read that I'm like gonna want to devour in 2 days. Next up I have The Secret Keeper of Jaipur by Alka Joshi, and for those of you who have been following my channel for the last couple of years, I think the first book in this series, or like the companion to this novel, The Henna Artist, was actually one of my favorite books of the year, I think in 2020. So one thing you should know about me is that I don't really love unnecessary sequels or like continuations of stories. So I was sort of wary of this going into it because the first book really wraps up everything. It's about this one woman's journey. She is this henna artist in 1950s India. This book is a continuation of that story. It takes place many years later and follows a minor character in the first book who is now much older. He was like a kid in the first book and now now he's like in his 20s, I think. And then there's another like side character who's completely new to this book. And then we also get perspective chapters from the original main character from the henna artist named Lakshmi, I think. So when I originally heard about this book, I actually thought it was only going to be one perspective, and I thought that perspective was going to be the boy who grows up in this book, so Malik. I thought it was going to be sort of his journey and making his way in the world, because in the book he's more of an outcast and he is poor and he just has like the makings of having a similar character to Lakshmi, the main character from the first book. So I was excited to sort of follow his journey. Although this book sort of does that, it does really sort of pull on old strings from the first book and like brings in that main character, and then has like this weird side character that I didn't really love. And overall, it just felt really disjointed. And although all of it comes together by the end, I don't think it was done very, very well. And overall, I think I was just disappointed by this book because it just didn't hit the same notes that the first one did. I think The Henna Artist was just such a compelling, like heartbreaking and moving story about this woman. Whereas this one, I was just like, what the hell's going on for most of it. I feel like there's definitely people out there who enjoyed this one, so power to them. But yeah, I think I just wanted more out of this one. Next up, I have A Real Easy by Marie Rukowski. I think I talked about this one in like multiple anticipated releases videos, and I was just really excited overall because it seemed like an interesting concept. So Marie Rukowski is actually the author of another YA series called The Winner's Trilogy, which is one that I read in high school and really, really loved. And I think what I loved about that series was like the political intrigue and also like the mystery that was going on in the books. But that was like a fantasy series. And so I've never read anything else from her, but when I found out that she was writing an adult novel and that it was a thriller, I was actually quite excited because I feel like she would be good about parsing out a mystery and making that happen on page. And while I do think that the mystery was like generally good in this book, I think I wasn't as like gripped by the characters. I feel like there's thrillers that I've read where I'm so engrossed in the mind of the characters, or I know them like so personally, even though I've only read like a chapter from them. And this one did not do that for me. This is basically a thriller set in this like strip club in the 90s, I think, and follows many of the dancers there. And it involves a murder when one of them is killed, and you're trying to figure out who the killer is. And there's also someone that gets kidnapped as well. And there's so many different characters that come into play for this book, and you get their perspectives all along the way. The multiple perspectives just didn't work for me because I didn't feel invested in the characters and I didn't know who they were. And overall, I feel like although the mystery and like the twists were cool, I didn't feel as invested in them because I didn't care as much about the characters. Alrighty, and then the final book that disappointed me in 2022 is To Sir Philip with Love by Julia Quinn. And this is the, I think, 5th book in the Bridgerton series. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Bridgerton is this like series of romance novels by Julia Quinn, and it follows this one family called the Bridgertons, and they've got like 10 different kids in that family, and it's like a Regency romance. And so each book in the series follows a different kid in the family and their love story. And this one in particular is Eloise's story. So if you've watched the show, then you are probably familiar with her. And I am a huge fan of the show. I watched the first season and then I read all 5 of the books earlier this year before watching the second season. And if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on each of the books in the series, I actually have a whole video where I read them and rank them, so go check that out. But basically my reason for being disappointed with this book is because it was particularly Eloise's story, and Eloise is actually my favorite character in the series and also in the show. And so I had really high hopes for what her love story would be like. And this is also a story that hasn't yet happened in the show as well. And I think the show is like following one season to one book, so it's going to be a few seasons before we get this one. So I'm definitely curious to see how the show tackles Eloise's story, because I feel like it's going to be different, and Eloise herself in the show versus the book is a little bit different. But I think I was already sort of disappointed with, I think, the 4th book in the series, which is Penelope's story, which is going to be the basis for the 3rd season. So we'll see how that goes. But I think even just looking at the book series on its own and Eloise's character in the book series, I still really love her as a character. And I think I just had really high hopes for how her love story would go. And I think this just wasn't it. The plot that happens in this book, the person she ends up with, the people that she ends up with just didn't really hit it for me. I feel like there was a totally different story out there for her that would have been better, but you know, whatever. The way I feel about this book is the way that you would feel when you're watching like a TV series and the girl doesn't end up with the guy that you wanted her to, and then you're just really upset about it. Like, that's how I feel about this book. Even though I feel like there's not even a second like person I wish she would have ended up with. Like, I don't even have another option for her based off of what was actually in the series. Like, I just wanted her to create something better for Eloise because she deserves better. So that's how I feel. I don't know. I would love to hear your opinions if you have read the Bridgerton series and what you think of this book. I also feel like this one was like a shorter book. I feel like we just didn't delve into a lot of the different aspects of Eloise's character that could have been possible. And I'm honestly just curious to see how the show will tackle Eloise's story, because I feel like they've taken some creative liberties with her character and her story already that will make it really interesting for when her season eventually comes. So I hope they do a better job of it, but you know, who knows? I'm excited to see regardless. With all that said, those are all the books on this video of books that disappointed me in 2022. Once again, I by no means think that these books are awful or terrible or that you shouldn't pick them up. I feel like some of you may have watched this video and you were like, oh, actually no, that sounds like something I would like. I'm gonna go pick this up, which I am so happy for you. I just wish I had loved these as much. Aside from that, I do think it is interesting to do this video just in the sense of like seeing how my taste is and how it will change in the future, because I think I will say that I don't like these books, but then a similar book might come along later on in the future and I might end up loving it. And I think it's just interesting to see how my taste will end up changing. And I do think what's interesting about the books that I showed you today is that there's a pretty broad variety of them. They cross different genres, both like genres that I don't usually pick up, like literary fiction, or like genres that I do pick up a lot, which is YA. And so it's interesting to see, you know, which ones I didn't end up liking and for what reasons. With all that said, I would love to hear from you guys what you thought of these books if you've read them, and if you disagree with my opinions or agree with my opinions in any way. And I would love to hear from you guys what books disappointed you in 2022. Let me know. Let me know which books you thought weren't it for you, that disappointed you because of XYZ, or books that you didn't enjoy that you think I probably wouldn't enjoy as well. I feel like I usually ask you guys to let me know books that you think I'm gonna enjoy, but let me know which ones you think I shouldn't waste my time with, because, you know, life is short and I want to read books I'm gonna love. Thank you guys so much for watching. Definitely go check out my Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, and TikTok in the description down below if you want to get regular updates on my life and my reading, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that the story ain't over. Bye!